Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Christina Matekel, and I attend San Jose State University School of Information Online. My focus is on youth services and public libraries. I've worked with children ages 3 to 15 since I graduated high school, so about 10 years now. And I've worked with children both in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I was born and raised, as well as in Northeast Oklahoma and Joplin, Missouri, where I moved 5 years ago. I currently work as a circulation assistant in the town of Joplin, Missouri. And as you can see, my presentation is entitled "Something is Missing: Racial Diversity in Young Adult Library and Information Science Education." And I will be speaking about the lack of courses and library science programs that cover diverse youth patrons. And I wanted to talk a little bit really quick about how I came to be interested in this subject. I grew up, as I said, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's a very diverse place. In high school, every year we would have Diversity Week, where they'd have different presentations, and it was everywhere. And then when I moved to the Midwest, I was shocked at how not diverse it was. For example, the town I live in now, Joplin, Missouri, is I think 97% white, so there's not a lot of diversity. And then, so that's kind of where the diversity, my interest in diversity came from. And then as far as with young adults specifically, when growing up I loved to read and I was always at the library, but I know that that's not especially common. A lot of kids don't like to read, or unfortunately a lot of kids don't know how to read. And when it's not interesting, they are going to be less inclined to want to read or to start going to the library. And so when the library reaches out to them, when it represents them, it feels more applicable to them. It's not this strange, threatening place. So that's where my interest in the subject came about. So the dictionary defines diversity as the condition or quality of being diverse, different, or varied. And Yeager, Subramanian, Jones, and Berteau define it as the underrepresented, the disadvantaged, and the underserved. And although other diverse groups are important and definitely deserve representation, I will only be discussing racial diversity due to a need to keep my presentation focused. So in California alone, 14.6% of the population is teenagers. Although the census doesn't break the teenage demographic down further, the overall minority population numbers indicate that there are large teen minority populations as well. So in California, 6.2% of people are African American, 13% are Asian American, and 37.6% are Hispanic. Clearly, minority groups are a big part of California's fabric, and therefore a big portion of those served by libraries. Even when the numbers aren't that high, it's clear that minority groups are there, and we as future librarians have a responsibility to serve them. That responsibility, as great as it is, I believe becomes even stronger when minority populations are smaller, when they need someone to advocate for them, or even better, to encourage them to advocate for themselves. In Oklahoma, Native Americans are 9% of the population, and in some towns within the state, like the town where I recently moved from, the percentages are even higher. However, many Native Americans are seen as separate. Although some cities, especially larger cities, have memorials and museums, libraries in local towns rarely have local history that includes one of the most visible groups in the state. For example, the town that I just moved from, which is Miami, Oklahoma, they have 10 Native American tribes there, but you wouldn't know it because Route 66 also runs through Miami, and that is the big focus. So all the things in the library are all about Route 66, and they're completely ignoring this other really important group and research opportunity, I guess. And I don't believe it's because the librarians don't care. I just think a lot of times it's because they haven't had the training necessary to reach those local Native American groups. And if they aren't Native American themselves, how will they know how to reach them or what they need? According to the census, the majority of children in this country will likely be children of color by 2030, so 15 years. This means that the majority of children served by the library will be children of color. This puts a lot of responsibility on educators and librarians to cater to those individuals, to develop programming, and to build up collections that represent those numbers. Excuse me. Representation is key to success in any organization. The American Society of News Editors is conducting its own census within the news community to determine changes newsrooms must make to better reflect their readers, writers, and editors. And I think that's just a really good, even though it's a different field, that's a really good example of instead of just saying, we appreciate diversity, doing something about it and finding out what it is exactly you need to do to reach out to those groups. And there was one study done in 2007 by Allard, Mayra, and Kayum. They looked at the Latino population in the library profession. And between 1993 and 2003, Latino students comprised 64% of the newly enrolled students in California. And this report acknowledges that while hiring a larger number of Latino librarians would be ideal, it isn't always realistic, especially considering that between 1995 and 2000, there were only 3.1% Latino MLIS graduates. And although this report was done almost 10 years ago, it speaks to a larger truth, which is that while educating and hiring larger numbers of diverse groups would be very helpful, the existing librarians and MLIS students who happen to be white can and should be able to reach diverse teams as well. In 1992, ALA's accreditation committee identified cultural diversity as a requirement in library science education. But in 2010, a study by Mestre noted that only 22.2% of LIS students have the option to take a diversity-related course. This next figure then makes sense. Only 21.3% of those same LIS students felt prepared to work with diverse students. Now, few, if any, library schools have ignored the issue of inclusion and representation in LIS education. Almost all professional library associations have similar goals or mission statements regarding diversity. And Subramaniam and Yeager completed a study in 2011 in which they discussed this very contradiction. According to their work, many library schools have even implemented initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion. However, few dictate what that should look like. It is one thing to be a proponent of diversity in young adult LIS education, and it is another to make an effort to showcase those beliefs. So you can talk all you want about how much you appreciate diversity and how important it is, but that's just talk if you don't do anything to follow up on that. So teenagers in general are a somewhat difficult group to reach, and they're often dismissed as a nuisance, especially in libraries or just public places in general. And couple that with the difficulty that librarians have in reaching diverse groups as a whole, and we have a very specific yet important role to fill. So let's take a look at some of the available applicable courses and how they could be improved. What you're seeing here is some course descriptions at Syracuse University's in their Library and Information Science program. And the first one, which is highlighted in pink, is called Library Services for Underrepresented Populations. And the course all the way at the bottom is called Youth Services in Library and Information Centers. Well, what if there were another course entitled Library Services for Underrepresented Youth Populations? Or what if they adjusted the latter course to focus on our underrepresented youth? This certainly wouldn't harm the groups with plenty of representation, but it does harm those few minority students in a school whose needs are ignored. When a minority group only makes up a small portion of their town or school, a library that ignores their needs, whether intentional or not, will only make them feel less important. San Jose State, which is the program in which I'm enrolled, has a course entitled Library Services for Racially and Ethnically Diverse Communities, as well as two others called Programming and Services for Young Adults and Materials for Young Adults. Although the professors do their best to discuss books that cover a variety of perspectives, the fact that the class isn't focused on diverse teens specifically naturally limits the information it can cover on the subject. It isn't groundbreaking to tell you that librarians are no longer seen as guardians or keepers of information. However, I don't believe that we're just guides through information either. As educators and community leaders, librarians have a serious responsibility to the teenagers that they work with. As Lamb noted in an article on cyberbullying, a teen services librarian is in a unique position to provide not only interesting programming and materials, but social emotional support as well. An interesting movement that is coming out of libraries and schools in the UK is pastoral care. Pastoral care isn't just assuming the role of the overbearing guidance counselor or the hip friend. Instead, it consists of utilizing available resources to encourage social and emotional support. For example, the library at which I work in Joplin, Missouri recently put up an LGBTQ display in its teen department. The Midwest town has a somewhat visible LGBTQ population, but it's still the Midwest, a place that is deep within the Bible Belt. And utilizing books already in circulation, which is what the teen department did, is a really easy way to show support for teens who don't identify as heterosexual, as well as to offer varied perspectives to those who do. Providing support through information, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, audiobooks, magazines, movies even, is a responsibility of teen services librarians. Without the right training and resources on how best to reach patrons and expand viewpoints, how can we be expected to do so successfully, particularly when we are raised in a place that, like Joplin, Missouri, isn't exceptionally diverse? In a 2010 article, Yeager said, if students are not aware of issues of diversity, inclusion, and underrepresentation, these students will not be able to adequately serve their communities or their profession. As previously mentioned, if librarians are not members of minority groups themselves, which is another issue entirely, how can they reach those groups? LIS courses, beyond the general required courses, are often electives anyways. For example, the SJSU School of Information offers career pathways with recommended courses, but again, those are just recommendations. While students should be free to choose what they want to focus on, it can be difficult to get the right kind of training and education when young adult courses themselves are electives, and of those electives, courses that focus on diverse populations are few and far between. How are we supposed to adequately serve diverse teens when we have to jump through so many hoops to get there? I recently read a quote in a 2011 study by Yeager that said, "It is the responsibility of LIS educators to prepare future librarians to understand and meet the unique information needs of underserved, disadvantaged, and underrepresented populations in physical and electronic settings. Without preparation for these kinds of issues, future information professionals will struggle to connect information with the populations who seek it." While LIS educators are definitely responsible for the education of LIS students, there are things that we can do while we're in school to make our opinions heard on issues that are important to us and to patrons that we will someday serve. We may not be able to change things at an administrative level, but we can definitely voice our concerns. We can present data, we can offer our opinions using things like end of semester evaluations and even just conversations with our professors. We can also join student organizations, which are places where we can make our voices heard and reach other students in the process. And I wanted to share an example of librarians successfully reaching out to diverse young adult groups. And maybe this isn't groundbreaking to you, but I'm hoping that it offers for those who don't work in diverse areas, it offers a simple example of how to reach out to diverse groups. So let's go ahead and get started.
Located in beautiful Burlington, Vermont is Edmonds Middle School. Edmonds Middle School is located alongside Lake Champlain. Surprising to many is that a school in Vermont can be so diverse. Edmonds Middle School is truly a welcoming place for all. As you enter the school, you'll notice greetings that represent the students of Edmonds Middle School. The doors are adorned with not just English hellos, but hellos in many different languages.
The EMS library is a place for students to collaborate and foster their creativity and critical thinking skills.
One thing I really value about our library is the way our librarians take a lot of time to embrace diversity and encourage equity and inclusion in the resources that we have here in our library. Carol takes a lot of time to collaborate with the classroom teachers, the ELL teachers, and the special educators to make sure that what we have is a reflection of our population. There are different books, Kindle stories, audiobooks, movies at all different reading levels for our students so they feel encouraged as well as motivated to continue reading, to improve on their reading, and to use our library. All of the books are a reflection of our students. There are books from all over the country, all over the world.
So right here is my favorite section of all because it's fantasy, all of it.
So I see our library as the lifeblood of our community. And our community is a beautifully vibrant and evolving community. We have many diverse learners and students coming in from all backgrounds and all over the world. We are truly international. And the library has served as this sort of meeting point where we're able to come together, collaborate, create, and think critically. And this is possible through the resources that our library has been providing, and the outreach to families, specifically to families that are marginalized and often overlooked. Our library, I'm very proud to say, does an excellent job of reaching out to families and bringing families in and inviting diverse learners to come access the information and actually interact with it, be it an audio book or a book that's written in 2 languages. For example, we just had a book bunch where families and their children come together, and we have a literature circle. And in our book bunch, we had 1 book that was written in both Nepali and in English, and that served as sort of a beautiful example of our community and how we share and interact with fiction and information.
So I created this cartoons video for the incoming 6th graders to get and look at the library that we have at Edmonds and what they can do and what they can't do at times. So for the 6th grade orientation, and it sort of explains the basics for them.
Okay, so I hope you were all able to hear that. It's a little quiet. And I, again, wanted to show that because I think, unfortunately, few libraries look like the one at Edmonds Middle School. And I don't think it's due to lack of appreciation of other cultures. Instead, I think it's due to just ignorance about the subject, and not purposeful ignorance. When we aren't aware of our demographics, of the people that we're serving, and when we aren't taught how to serve those groups, we aren't going to affect very much change. And while it would be nice if every library offered its employees diversity training, it isn't always possible due to financial and time constraints. But we do have the time when we are studying, when we are learning how to be librarians, and when we're learning how to serve patrons. I believe that the future is bright for librarians and for all those who partake in library services. I know that the current landscape of LIS education in this particular area isn't perfect, but I think it's both hopeful and promising. As I discussed earlier, diversity is a priority for the library field, as made evident in mission statements and recent courses popping up at universities across North America. But it needs to be high priority rather than something upon which we just agree. But what can we do as students to express these needs, especially as so many of us are spread throughout the world, only communicating via email and discussion boards? We can start, again, by making efforts to voice our concerns in spite of those distances. In fact, I think those distances might even help us. For example, when I share my concerns with my SJSU classmates, I am not just sharing them with people who live in San Jose, California, a city that is very diverse. I am also talking with students in Omaha, Nebraska, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Austin, Texas. And I believe that through these venues, we can affect powerful change. And I know and believe that we have the responsibility and the power to speak up for the diverse teens that we will someday be serving. That's all I have. Thank you.
Or in person have a question for Christina? Yeah, go ahead. I'm scared to speak
So I'm Michelle. I'm a first-year master's student here. And I guess you had mentioned about sometimes part of how you can put more diversity in your libraries making book displays and making it so that these materials are more prominent. But I have found that last summer I had an internship before I started library school where they would not let me do an OCD display in the library at all. They just wouldn't let me do it. and I wasn't in library school yet. I didn't have the tools to really combat that, or at least I didn't think I did. So if like anyone has any like advice at like which point do you, like if you ask your boss and your boss says no, like what do you do about that, and what responsibility do you have?
Did you get all that, Christina?
Yeah, I think I got most of it. Let me try to try to make sure I understood it.
So Michelle is about issues with sort of engaging with other professionals in the library world or employers or supervisors in library communities about issues of diversity, especially in exhibits and displays.
I think that, especially right now, I don't have any of the links available right now, unfortunately, which I should. But a lot of information is coming out about representation in books and in media in general. And there's a really good initiative that has started up. It's called We Need Diverse Books. And they started on Tumblr. And so they have a Tumblr page. And they also have a website and things. And they're really active on Twitter. But they post all kinds of research on the subject. And I think that that is important to, you can present it to the people that you work with. I know like in the library where I work, I'm just a circulation assistant, so I don't have very much say on anything. But I think a lot of times in libraries, especially, you know, like the previous presenter had mentioned, you know, it's a pretty conservative profession. And I think a lot of times it's because a lot of the librarians are, you know, have been at their libraries for decades. And I think that sometimes they forget to see patrons as people. So I think it's good to share that research and to share specific examples. Because even if you, I mean, everyone has like their regulars that come in that they really enjoy talking to, and I think when you connect it to those patrons and, you know, put a face on the data too, maybe that can help. But I don't know. I'm not. Those are just some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that reaching out to the library community and trying to kind of use tools that already exist to engage with people about diversity is one way to do it. But of course, it's really difficult to talk to people about diversity, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so glad that so many people here are presenting on diversity, and one of the reasons that this is such an exciting presentation. We might have time for one more quick question if anyone has something they really want to ask Christina. Any urgent questions?
I know Aman had a comment. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, so Aman says, libraries are supposedly interested in hiring librarians of diverse backgrounds, but during job interviews and professional networking events, I've noticed that there are still microaggressions embedded in interactions. I hope that the new generation of librarians will be able to confront these behaviors in the future. Aman, I think that's really well said. Christina, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, kind of. I think that I definitely agree with that sentiment, and I think that, like, unfortunately, a lot of there is a lot of you know, unfortunate events have occurred, and there's a lot of tension between minority and amongst minority groups, or between minority groups and white authority, and I think that that's really, you know, that's really unfortunate. But I think that good things are coming from that. I think that people are realizing that that their voices matter, and that they don't have to be just polite and sit back and wait for change to happen. I've been really following the Ferguson Library. They are amazing. They've been having all kinds of, like when schools were closed and things, they were having volunteers offering classes at the school, and they have like community healing sessions. And I think that by I think doing instead of just waiting around to hope for change is really important. And it's really cool to, because I think that's a common thing to express, but it's really cool to see it in action, to see people realizing that their library cares about them, and so they, you know, feed into that, and it just keeps going. And so I think, I don't know about necessarily the hiring aspect, but I think that we can switch switch the dialogue or confront those behaviors, like Aman said, in the libraries themselves.
Thank you again, Christina. I'm really excited about the way we were able to structure this session.